Amateurs and professionals work together, a quote from Making Good Society in your presentation. What do you think this is, why do you think this is challenging today?
Well, I'd have to go back to that slide. It was like that polarity between what is considered to be trustworthy, the quality in news, why people tune into the BBC. You know, its reliability, it's the fact that it checks its sources. It's never first to air, but it has to check at least two sources before it runs with a story. Those sorts of values that are ingrained in, and the value, of course, of impartiality, do not translate well, do not fit very well with the more citizen-based journalism or user-generated or social media, which is, you notice up there the word iterative was used. Have you heard of the idea that on the internet, if you put a voice out there or an idea, like a Wikipedia or a Wikinews, if it's wrong, the internet has this thing called a self-correcting mechanism where the viewer or the listener or the user will say, that's wrong, and then they'll re-edit it, rework it. And if you multiply that over sort of a million or 10,000s of people using the media service, finally you get to something called the wisdom of crowds. And that is called an iterative approach. In other words, the wisdom of crowds self-correct the news that's out there, the information out there. Now that is an aberration to a corporation like the BBC that uses a very much a pre-moderated version of news. In other words, they check their facts, they make sure things are as true to what they think is actually happening as possible before they broadcast. So immediately you've got a huge cultural difference between what the web and what user-generated content, social media, citizen media is all about, and what the BBC's so-called professional quality is all about. So one of the things that I think is important for us to look at is redefining quality in this new environment, and that's really hard for the BBC to do.
You mentioned that the BBC should be worried about the demise of ITV local news, so that it's not left being the, and I quote, only player in the street.
Right, yeah.
Why is plurality in local news important?
Why is plurality important? Okay, well, think about this. Think about China, think about Russia. Okay, if you hear that China or Russia have one state broadcaster reporting on the local and regional level, would you think that perhaps wasn't very democratic? I mean, I would. Well, that's actually what we're coming down to now. We've got a weakened local and regional press. We've got the ITV de-investing itself, most likely because it's too expensive to make regional news in a digital environment. It was okay with the old analogue system. What you're left with is this large public-funded government corporation producing local and regional news. Now, from the outside, that looks pretty undemocratic. I think that's why they're worried. And I think plurality in a democracy is absolutely critical. Different voices competing for attention. If we don't have that, then we don't have what underpins our society and our democratic society, and that is holding power to account in a way that makes sense.
So, very quickly, so what do you think should be done about this?
Well, what should be done?
In your opinion?
Well, you'll notice from the presentation that I know what the BBC thinks should be done, and that, of course, they want all the sweeties, they want all the money, and then they want to choose how then they could use that money to support plurality and support the diversity of voices. If you're looking at the BBC specifically, I think there needs to be, and this is something that Robert Picard said this morning, a very big degree of cultural change. Perhaps on a local level, what I'd like to see is them hiring community managers, people whose job it is to link and curate and support. I mean, I didn't get into detail, but just think about it. If you have, 100 different ultra-local, hyper-local sites, some entrepreneurial, profit-making, some citizen-based advocacy groups, huge range of different services. Well, right now, the BBC refuses to link to these kinds of services for fear that they may not be quite as impartial as the BBC is, and their quality may not be quite as to the standards of the BBC. So what you have is a sort of this new tier of user content is being ignored by the BBC. Now, one small thing they could do is, if they employed a community manager, is they could use that person to look at ways, of improving the quality of this new tier of journalism, training, etc., but also to link to it. Yeah, very simple, hyperlink. But right now they're not doing that. So there's probably about 20, 30 different very prescriptive things that the BBC could start doing to support and nurture these voices, which I think are really, really critical right now.
Yeah. Okay. And very quickly, your final question, moving away from the presentation. You've mentioned that you've been a broadcast journalist for 15 years. What would your advice be, your ultimate advice for aspiring broadcast journalists today?
Wow, that's interesting. Well, we did hear that the employment situation is changing. And the BBC, although right now it has obviously had to make cuts in the last few years for its journalism. I think it's cut about 15 to 20%. So the BBC is not perhaps the best place to turn to start. I would say that what you need is multi-skilling. And that's probably what you're getting, I hope, in your university education.
Yes, you do.
So that you can turn your hand to many things, whether it's video on the cheap or whether it's understanding, how to Twitter and how to mine the Twitter field and how to engage in all kinds of forms of social media as a researcher. If you've got that, you've probably got more than the boss that you might have in whatever media organisation you go into. And then, of course, the final thing is entrepreneurial skills. My students aren't all very comfortable with the idea of being their own boss, but I think more and more now in this world that journalists will have to think about how they're going to create their own value and their own, either on their own or with the people that you're being educated with, the people you're graduating with. Keep their names, establish your own networks. But don't necessarily rely on a big sort of organisation to extend a hand of employment. I'm afraid it may not be the future for journalism.